morning, staff of the St. James Parish Library. My name is Andrea Nelson, and I'm the Assistant Parish Coordinator for Disaster Preparedness. This morning, I will be bringing information to you regarding your preparedness as it relates to disaster on the whole, but specifically, we will be zooming in on hurricane preparedness in light of the hurricane season, which started June 1. Let's see how prepared we are. Alright, so this presentation this morning will take the form of defining the term disaster, looking at various disasters. We will also explore factors which affects our vulnerability as a country, and also we will be looking at hurricane preparedness, how we prepare for hurricane before, during, and after. Alright, so let's get into it. What is a disaster? One may ask. Alright, a disaster, this may either be natural or man-made. Alright, so of course we know natural disasters speaks to those are disasters which are outside of our control, like the creator. So we have hurricane as one of those, we have earthquake, and others. Man-made speaks to fire. These are man-caused incidents. Alright, so disaster, this is a natural or man-caused event which causes intense negative impact on people's lives. Alright? We're going to look at some examples. Examples of disaster. Hurricane. We also have earthquake, floods, landslide, drought, fire, just to name a few. Alright, so we have explored the different types of disaster that pretty much affects us as a country. Let's look at some factors that influence our vulnerability. And when we speak to vulnerability, meaning, alright, so of course we are not vulnerable to all disasters, right? So the ones that we are vulnerable to, hurricane, so the ones that we are vulnerable to, it is necessary for us to prepare for them. Alright, so some factors that affect our vulnerability is our location. Because of where we are located, we are affected by some disasters but not others. So for example, we're not affected by a volcano, right? But we are vulnerable to a hurricane based on our location. Also, factors that influence our vulnerability speaks to the area in which we live in as well. We know that Montego Bay is a flood-prone area. As rain falls, we are affected by flooding. Alright, so location is one factor. Population is also another factor. Time of occurrence. The time of the occurrence it speaks to our level of vulnerability. Because let's think about the time. Specific day or night. Alright, let's think about a disaster happening at daytime. We're less vulnerable than at nighttime, because at nighttime we may be sleeping exactly, so we may be out of consciousness. Alright, so day versus nighttime, before, during, or after the event. So of course, if we're affected by a disaster during the daytime, then it will give us more time to take action as opposed to nighttime. Alright? It may also affect the infrastructure. Right? Roadways may be damaged as a result of an eventuality. Building, communication system. Because we do know that during an incident, communication are normally temporarily cut off, right? Roadways depending on the eventuality, because if it is a case of a hurricane, let's speak specifically to hurricane in light of the whole season that we are currently in. A hurricane can also give rise to secondary hazard. because as a result of a hurricane, we can have flooding, right? We can also have landslides. Now, if we have flooding may also affect our infrastructure because it damages the roadways. So that speaks to, that is one example of infrastructure damage. And also another factor is our ability to respond. When we speak of our ability to respond, this speaks to if we're able or disabled. Alright? In addition, physical. Alright, so some effects of a disaster include physical effects. What do we mean by physical effects? Alright, so a disaster may result in death. It may also result in homelessness. It may give rise to diseases, right? Because in the event, alright, let's say for example, a hurricane were to come now. If we are not prepared, if we don't take the necessary precaution, it may cause loss of lives and also it may cause homelessness. Right? It can also give rise to economical effects. When we speak, so we all are aware of our vision 2030, right? So once we see this picture, we know what we're talking about, right? And of course, when we say economical, meaning it's going to cause some setback, because if we have a plan for 2030 to say, all right, these are the goals that we are trying to attain at a particular time, and a disaster were to happen, what does that do? It sets us back, which means we have to go back to the drawing board and we have to tweak our plan, and resources that we had set aside to focus on a particular goal, we have to divulge in that to do rehabilitation, which means there is going to be some amount of setback economically. Alright, we're continuing with effects, psychological effects. One may take for granted that, okay, no, we have not experienced a great magnitude, but trust me, psychological effect is one important one. Because to think about losing our home, that is our safe space, right? Having that taken away from us in the blink of an eye, outside of our control. This means that we have to depend on other persons temporarily, but it puts us in an inconvenient position, which may give rise to psychological implication. Alright, so some of these psychological effects that may happen as a result of a disaster could be shock, because it may catch you off guard. Some disasters come without no warning, but others, even though we get an opportunity to prepare for it, the magnitude at which, no matter how you prepare, sometimes it doesn't matter how much you prepare, the effects are too significant. Alright, so that may give rise to shock, feeling of insecurity, and what makes one feel insecure? Having to depend on others, right? If it's something that you're not used to, trust me, this is going to shock you, right? Post-traumatic stress and other medical implications. Because they always say stress gives rise to a lot of health complications. Alright, so this picture, we're familiar with this. This is a disaster management cycle. Mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. Where does this cycle begin? Where does this cycle begin? Mitigation. Alright, so we want to mitigate against, because the truth is, a hurricane, we are vulnerable to it. We have no control over if it happens or not. But we do know the negative implication of that eventuality. Hence, we can put safeguards in place to minimize the negative effects that may be associated with a particular disaster. So that speaks to mitigation. We cannot stop it, but we can implement stuff to alleviate the pressures. Preparedness. We have to prepare for. Is it necessary to prepare? Once we are vulnerable to, then prepare for. So we mitigate against, we prepare for, because it may come. The season is now, so it's a matter of when it's going to come. If it's going to come, because some seasons leave us thankfully to God, right? But once we're vulnerable to, prepare. It's best to be prepared and nothing happens than to not be prepared and something happens and it catches you off guard, right? So we mitigate against, we prepare for, and we respond to. We respond to when it comes. So when it comes, how do we respond? Alright? So we know the effects of the events, so we respond accordingly. Right? So of course, if it means that you live in a front pool area, you don't want to stay in a front pool area. You are going to ensure that you familiarize yourself with your surrounding, your shelter, and if needs be, you evacuate. Alright, so you respond to, and lastly, we recover from. So after the fact, we go into recovery mode. Depending on the magnitude of damage, life goes on, so we have to pick up the pieces and we recover from. Alright, so bear that in mind, we mitigate against, prepare for, respond to, and recover from. Alright, how do we prepare? That's a very good question. How does one prepare for a disaster? Do we even need to prepare for a disaster? Do you agree? You think it's necessary? No hurricane must come, so I don't have to prepare. We have to prepare. We have to prepare. Why? Because we are vulnerable to a hurricane. We don't have to prepare for a volcano, because we're not vulnerable to that, right? But no. Alright, so how does one prepare for a disaster? You need to become familiar with your community disaster history and always make reference to our city. We know that it's a flood-prone city. With that being said, we know that, alright, the magnitude of rain, we don't need to be in the city currently, right? So that's all. Once you're familiar with the area, so your specific area in which you live, try to become familiar with it. What are the possible secondary hazards that can happen as a result of a primary hazard? So let's say a hurricane comes down. What does history show? Usually land slippage in a particular area. So become familiar with the area in which you live. That way you can mitigate against, and that way you prepare for. Alright? Also, you want to conduct some pre-disaster planning, pre-impact planning. Pre-impact planning speaks to shelter. As I said, try to familiarize yourself with the shelter. The St. James Municipal Corporation, under our departments, we have a list of the emergency shelters available. Alright? So depending on the community in which you live in, you will know the shelter that is closest to you. So if the needs be that you need to evacuate, then you will know which shelter is closest to you and which shelter you will utilize. Usually, public schools, community center, sometimes churches are used as emergency shelters. Alright, so become familiar with your shelter within your area and also familiarize yourself with your community history. Alright, so we'll continue with how to prepare for a disaster. Establish a community disaster response team. Develop a community disaster plan. Developing a community disaster plan, this speaks to you have to familiarize yourself with the community as well, so you know. Alright, so my area is flood-prone. That way you will be able to come together and develop your plan. Alright, so if we see excessive rainfall, then we know that we as a community member, we have to evacuate. No need to stay because it may give rise to injury or loss of life. Don't take for granted that it cannot happen. Alright? Maintaining an up-to-date internal and external contact listing. For your family, for your you want to ensure that, as I said to you, we have the shelter list. We also have an emergency contact list. This is a list that has the different agencies and it has their contact number. So we have the Jamaica Fire Brigade, the Jamaica Constable Force, Jamaica Defense Force. All those agencies are on that list. It is available to the general public. It has their contact number. So this is something that you want to ensure. So every year, we always update our emergency contact list for the purpose of public. Alright, so we have looked at ways in which how we prepare for a disaster before. Alright, so now we're going to delve into the meat of the matter, which is a hurricane. Alright, so just have to watch that short video. Hurricane season begins June 1. Today is June how much? It's June 9. Alright, what is a hurricane? Alright, so a hurricane, this is a large storm that develops over the ocean and it spins in a counter-clockwise rotation. Alright, so we know that the center as it shows on the diagram, that part is the eye, the outer band right there, it is the eye wall, and we go clockwise rotation. Alright, so that image shows. Alright, so this picture, it shows the frequency of the development. Alright, so here in red, that's June. All the months that are highlighted in red, that speaks to the season, the entire season. So it starts June 1st and it ends November. Alright? November 31st. Alright. So on the diagram here, the area, you will just see the steady rise in the month of September, which speaks to, that is the high wind. That is where it peaks. So of course, as it starts, you will find that you'll have rain, depending, you'll have rainfall and it gradually rises in September and then it dies down in October. But September is usually where you can look to see, alright? We may have a system that's forming in that time. Alright, so of course, as a result of a primary disaster, we can have secondary disasters that come as a result of it. Alright, so of course, a hurricane can give rise to wind damage, storm surge, landslides and flooding, depending on the magnitude of wind speed. You can have wind damage, we can have roof damage, also land slippage. Excessive rainfall can give rise to flooding. So these are some secondary hazards as a result of a hurricane. Let's go into preparation. How does one prepare for a hurricane before it happens? Alright, so we're in before stage, although the season has started, but it is still, we can consider it before, right? Because we have not had an incident. So this is us preparing. What are some ways in which we can prepare for a hurricane before it happens? Alright, so you want to check on your property and contents, ensure that your insurance policy is up to date, right? Ensure that you fill your car with gas. Also, you want to ensure that you have sufficient supply of water, so you want to store water. Check your flashlight, lamps, and kerosene supply for the use of lighting. You're going to need that because in the event of a disaster, usually we have power outage. So what is going to be your backup plan? How am I going to get lighting? So these are things that you need to explore prior to. Listen to your radio and television, right? So that you can be guided. If you are on medication, ensure that you refill your medication, ensure that they're accessible to you, easy access, right? Ensure that you want to also secure an adequate supply of food and emergency supplies. When I say adequate supply of food, this speaks to if you're going to stock up, ensure you stock up on non-perishable items. Non-perishable items speaks to things that are not easily spoiled. Alright, so like tin items. During a hurricane. So it must start. What do I do during when it is on its way? Ensure that you stay inside. Don't go outside, stay inside because that is the safest place to be. Do not open your doors or your windows. Do not go outside during the night. Okay? Listen to your radio as long as you still have electricity. Alright? Alright, after the hurricanes, of course, it must come to an end. So once it comes to an end, what are some of the things that you ought to do? Ensure you document damages or losses sustained, because you may have dangling power lines. It is not your responsibility to go into fixing mode. There are special persons, so you contact those individuals for assistance. Do not touch dangling power wires because this is how persons get electrocuted. Alright? Throw out spoiled food because you might have been out of electricity. So if it is that you had meat in your refrigerator, depending on how long this outage lasted for, then you know that these food would not be good. So you want to ensure that you get rid of those. Boil water before drinking, because sometimes the pipes are normally contaminated. So you don't want to just go to the tap and get water. Boil it before you consume it. Seek medical help at the hospital if necessary. Monitor your radio to get frequent updates. Alright? Why is it important to plan? Alright, it is important to plan for an eventuality because it minimizes the risk, it saves time, it reduces panic, and it also facilitates prioritization of your resources. And this is a picture of emergency supply. Alright, so you want to ensure that you have your prescriptions, food and water. items that you should have as preparing for. Alright, so have your first aid kit, blanket, portable radio, your flashlight, your batteries, food. Alright, and ensure that it is non-perishable food supply. Alright, so this wraps up my presentation for today. I hope you found it informative. I cannot stress enough the importance of preparing. Preparing helps to alleviate panic. It minimizes the damage